Before the video starts, a friendly reminder that I'm not looking for feedback or advice about my mental health. Thank you for respecting my boundaries, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello friends and welcome back. Today we are starting another Keep or Cull video. We are going to be working with the Star Spinner Tarot for the next few weeks. This is a beautifully colourful and expressive deck created by the artist Trungles. I think it was released, was it last year or the year before? I've had it for a little while anyway, and when I first got it, I spent quite a bit of time with it. It was probably the primary deck I used for a month or two. I really enjoyed it. But then, as we know, I sort of slowed down on my tarot use. This deck went back on my shelf and I haven't really touched it since. But I asked you recently over on my community tab here on YouTube which deck you would like to see me use next, and it was pretty close, but the Star Spinner won this round. Now, before we get into it, there were a few things I wanted to talk about this deck. Now, from what I understand, a lot of the images are actually based on stories, folktales, and mythology, which is not my specialty, in case you haven't noticed. Sometimes I find with decks, I want to be really involved in the intention and the symbolism and stuff that the artist has put into the cards, and other times I find that I get more out of my experience with a deck just letting it exist and have my own interaction with it without too much of that background thinking and analysis. And I'm not really sure yet which approach I will most enjoy with this deck and get the most from. So I think I would like to experiment with that a little bit. Additionally, there are actually extra lovers cards in this deck, which I think is really cool. This has been done to make the deck more representative of different experiences of relationships and different understandings of the lovers card. For example, we have one card here that looks to be two masculine figures embracing, one card with two figures holding hands with the angel in the background, which I suppose sort of leans into more of the idea of choice and some of the symbolism we see in the Rider-Waite-Smith and Marseille, for example, with that additional third figure. And I suppose because all of the other lovers cards include only two figures, this might be an option for people who are polyamorous, for example, even if it's not explicitly the intention, I don't think. So I think these are the two that I'm first drawn to. And I think just visually a very gut reaction, emotional response. I think this one is my favorite from first impression. So that's the one that I'm going to be having in my deck. I really enjoy how it almost looks cosmic. It almost looks like these two characters floating to me. And although they are coming together and they're about to hold hands, I like how they're sort of two distinct figures. They seem like they're the two individuals choosing to come together in the midst of the chaos that is life. I don't know. I think just from an immediate, intuitive, emotional response, I think this one is my favorite. So for now, this is the one I'm going to pop into the deck. I like how even though these characters are all distinct and they certainly do represent different experiences, most of the characters could also be read to be pretty androgynous as well. There's a gentleness and a sweetness to all of the cards and to the features as well. But with that decision out of the way, it is now time for us to get stuck into working with the Star Spinner Tarot. So I was taking a look at the little white book, and there are a couple of spreads in here, but none that are sort of specific to the Star Spinner Tarot, so none that I'm particularly interested in trying. The book talks about a single card draw, a 4-card spread, which is sort of like a variation on past, present, future, and just the Celtic cross. So I usually love trying out a spread or two from the little white book, especially when the spreads have sort of been created for this deck by the creator, but I'm not particularly interested in those ones. So instead, I thought for our first round, we just keep it nice and simple. I would like to do a doing well, do better. What am I doing well at the moment? Got the 9 of Pentacles. I love this card. Oh, it's so pretty too. But let's draw my do better before we start talking about the card. What can I do better? Oh, another Pentacles. Got the 3 of Coins this time. Interesting. So I've spoken about the 9 of Pentacles a little bit in my Therapeutic Tarot series. Particularly, I think it was in the video where I discussed sort of defining your strengths with tarot. One of my major strengths is appreciating beauty and excellence, and I chose the 9 of Pentacles to represent that strength for me. My ability to seek out and find and recognize beauty and excellence, and that sense of awe and appreciation that I can tap into really easily. I used to think that sort of enthusiasm and passion was something that was sort of annoying about me, but it's something I've really grown to love and appreciate about myself. I'm doing well at finding those moments and opportunities to appreciate beautiful, wonderful things that make me happy. This card also does speak to themes of like confidence and independence, especially maybe financial independence, and a sense of achievement and accomplishment, I suppose, and like self-sufficiency. I think this is also connecting to the idea that I'm doing pretty well at taking care of myself at the moment. I don't exist in a vacuum. I'm very reliant on many people around me, but I'm doing pretty well at sort of taking care of what I need to take care of. I'm doing pretty well at taking care of myself as much as I can on my own, if that makes sense. Like I'm not overly relying on other people, which I think is a good thing. And with the owl instead of a falcon, maybe there's an element of me listening to my inner wisdom rather than, you know, always asking other people what they think I should do, stuff like that. I really like this card, it's lovely. And then the Three of Pentacles is interesting in this deck because we've got one character sort of looking up and it looks like they've released a genie who is fulfilling their wishes. And I suppose there is like a little bit of that element of like teamwork that we tend to see in the Three of Pentacles. It's just got a bit of a different spin on it here. Like we have one character who has released the genie from the lantern, and I don't know if you watched Aladdin, the genie doesn't really like being in the lantern and stuck there. And the genie or the magical being is sort of fulfilling their role of fulfilling wishes. So it's sort of two different people playing two very different roles. So to me, the Three of Pentacles in a very simplistic way tends to speak to things like work, teamwork and collaboration, and sort of like working together to achieve a goal. And I think there is also an emphasis here on quality and making sure that the work being done is being done well. And so in this position and with this card, I'm getting elements of like I need to make sure that the relationships that I have in my life, particularly working relationships, are equitable, I suppose, that I know my role, but I also know other people's roles, and that, you know, people aren't being taken advantage of, I suppose, and that the quality of the work isn't being compromised either. I do have a sense of what this card is speaking to in my life. It relates to someone else and an issue that is outside of myself too, though, so I don't feel like I can share that on the internet because it's not just mine to share. But this has given me quite a lot to think about. So it's interesting and it's helpful that this has come up for me. I'll say that much. And I think these two cards contrast really interestingly too, because the Nine of Pentacles often being about independence, whereas the Three of Pentacles being about teamwork and collaboration. And I'm doing one well, I'm doing the independence well, but I need to make sure that's not coming at the expense of other people that I'm working with or that I'm involved with. And comparing these two cards even further, this is sort of stretching the meaning of tarot, so bear with me. Just sort of comparing the two cards, we've got sort of like the central figure, which in the Nine of Pentacles is very clear, and then in the Three of Pentacles, we could say it's this figure down the bottom holding the lantern. And the other figure in each card, one is an owl, the other is like a magical being. And I was just watching a live chat with Zach over at Tiger's Abyss, in which he was discussing a lot of different things, but one of the things he was talking about and exploring was the difference between intuition and like imagination and make-believe. And so because that's fresh in my mind, I'm drawing that comparison with the cards too, that with the owl being in the Nine of Pentacles, what I'm doing well, like following my intuition, making wise choices and informed choices maybe, whereas maybe I'm also at risk of sort of slipping, losing that line and that clarity that wisdom brings, and slipping into more like the magical thinking, even wishful thinking maybe, associating that with the genie. I don't know. I think there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm going to leave these two cards out on my desk for the rest of the day because they're beautiful and because I think there's an awful lot in here for me. So I've really enjoyed this little reading. Okay, today we are doing an exercise that I actually made a video on in my Therapeutic Tarot series probably like 4, maybe 5 years ago. I don't remember exactly what I called it, but it was something to do with like exploring your experience through the minor arcana. And I'm just really in the mood for doing this today. So if you'd like a full explanation walkthrough, I will leave a link to that video in the description box below. Be kind, it's an old video. So I've already prepared, I've already separated each of the suits and put 1 to 10 in order. And then the next thing that I do is I go through and sort of have a think about which card best represents my experience right now. So currently I'm sort of feeling like 7 or 8 of Wands, somewhere between those two, or the 7 of Cups. Now also keep in mind that I am going off like my feeling, and I'm also not just going off solely what I know about the card. I'm also trying to incorporate my experience right now, immediately, intuitively, however you want to put it, of the artwork of the Star Spinner Tarot. Let me turn the ISO down a little. It's a bit bright, isn't it? Now, to be clear, the reason I want to do this is because I am currently feeling not hypermanic, but just a little on the edge of like, I could go that way. I feel a little bit buzzy. I feel like I sort of have a lot of energy. I sort of want to be doing a lot of things. I feel like easily distracted, but I also sort of feel a little bit great. If you know, you know. I don't want to get too personal about it, but that's the context basically. And so I suppose these two cards are appealing to me. One, because I mean, maybe traditionally the Seven of Wands wouldn't, but this Seven of Wands in particular, I don't know, there's something about this character that just feels really enthusiastic, sort of like him against the world, but in a really positive way. Also that little butterfly that's behind him and the sun behind him, like that feels like a level of inspiration to this experience for him. Because of this stream between his legs, it almost feels like he's a giant. I don't know. There's just an awful lot of energy in this card, and it feels quite similar to how I'm feeling. But then with the Seven of Cups, again, I don't know that I would have picked the Seven of Cups in the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith. But with this one, there's something about it that just feels quite, what's the word? With the fishes and the hair going everywhere, it just feels quite inspired, but a little like a level of overwhelm as well. Like she sort of isn't sure which fish to pay attention to. There's just a lot going on in this card. I do think though, having just spoken that through with you, it's the Seven of Wands that I'm identifying with most at the moment. So now that I've identified where I'm at, I will stick this here. So what I first like to do is have a look at what precedes this card and what follows it. Now this exercise absolutely assumes that the minor arcana do sort of follow a trajectory, a story from 1 to 10. Let me just see if I can zoom out a little. I know you can't see everything perfectly, but I hope that's enough to give you an idea. So basically, I just like to sort of look at, you know, the past. Where was I beforehand that sort of led me to here? And if I continue with this energy and don't make any changes, where am I heading? That's the idea. And I think with the Six of Wands, there was certainly a lot of positive things happening in my life. Sort of like I overcame a few challenges, and there was a few opportunities for people to be like celebrating me and sort of hyping me up, or at least I felt that way too about myself and some of the things that I'd achieved, big or small. I felt like I'd had quite a lot of success and I was really riding that high, I guess. Then that has led to here. And so what is potentially coming next is the Eight of Wands, which is a card that I do associate with manic symptoms for myself. I want to make that very, very clear. When I read for other people, I don't use the same sort of interpretations, especially with regards to mental health, that I've sort of made those connections with cards for myself. This is one of the fastest cards, I think, in the deck. There's so much action and like enthusiasm and passion and just like energy in this card, and it's sort of like all moving, and there's 8 different wands, and yes, they are all moving in the same trajectory for now, but I don't think that this card always implies that they're going to continue on the same trajectory. Things can get messy, and so I didn't intentionally pick the 7 just to make this obvious, but I think that is clear to me, that if I sort of am not careful with this energy where I'm currently at, that is where I'm headed, and I know that that's not healthy for me. So the next step is to have a look at the other 7s in the minor arcana. And I'm going to move the wands over so we can sort of do this. So the idea behind this step is to sort of consider where else I could be, or what else I could be doing or employing, to sort of have a look at maybe what I'm not doing at the moment, sort of get an idea of why I'm in the 7 of Wands as opposed to one of the other 7s. Like we've already spoken about, I did sort of identify with the 7 of Cups as well. But I think in the 7 of Cups, there is a sense of overwhelm and confusion, and I'm not really feeling that at the moment. Then the Seven of Swords, I think, requires a level of forethought, planning, a level of cunning that I'm just not employing at the moment. And for the Seven of Coins, I do think this is very much a card of like patience and waiting until the right time. And I definitely am lacking patience at the moment. To me, with the Seven of Pentacles, I do also often think of things like planning and considering like sort of opportunities in the future and what you need to put in place now. With the resources that you've already gained and like grown for yourself, what do you need to do with those in order to invest further, I guess. I'm using financial sort of language of invest and stuff, but it's not limited to that, obviously. And so I guess there's just not a lot of forethought planning. There's not a lot of confusion or overwhelm, and there's also not a lot of patience and consideration going on with me at the moment. And so I'm going to take this one away so that we can move this up, but this would still be in it for me. I just want to be able to show you these a little more clearly. So next I'm going to draw out the 8s for the rest of the suits. You can also take a look at the 6s, like the previous cards for the rest of the suits, because that can also tell you where you maybe went off track or something like that. But for now I just want to focus on what I want to do next, basically. So I think now looking at the 8 of 8s in the rest of the suits, I know that I don't want to head down into the 8 of Wands, because for some people that might be healthy, but for me, and this moment, this context, this is not a healthy option for me. Clearly, I also don't want to go into the 8 of Swords, which I think could happen quite easily. I think right now I'm sort of on the precipice of either going into hypomania or potentially like anxiety and depression and that sort of stuff. And I think the 8 of Chalices could sort of go either way. I think this is like less unhealthy than these two are, but also it involves walking away, clearly. I think it involves a very strong commitment and decision to leave behind what isn't serving you. And I'm not sure that there's a whole lot going on right now that is exactly where I need to go. Instead, what I think would be the healthiest option for me would be moving into the 8 of Pentacles. And that's not to just say that that's like the most positive card of the 8s. I don't think that's true. I think each of these cards offers a lot of opportunity and lessons and growth, depending on who you are and where you're at, right? But in terms of the level of energy I have and that I have a lot of ideas and I'm feeling really motivated, creative, passionate, enthusiastic, all of that. And I think if I can figure out how to put those things to work, I think this momentum could sort of run away from me and escalate into an unhealthy level. Whereas I think this focus and dedication and sort of like taking these ideas and everything that's sort of going on in this sort of place that I am at the moment and applying them and seeing them to their conclusions, or at least trying to perfecting them and working on them instead of just sort of like, I don't know, having a free-for-all in the 8 of Wands. But essentially this is just to sort of get a bit of a map of where I am, what brought me here and where I'm heading, but then also giving me options for maybe shifting things up. And so once I've decided that this isn't where I want to be heading, I mean, maybe it is if you do this exercise, but this is not where I want to be heading for me. And ideally, I'd like to shift over to the 8 of Pentacles. In order to do that, I need to shift my energy at least somewhat, or bring in some more energy of the 7 of Pentacles so that I can sort of like head over into this trajectory instead of this one. I think I'm going to keep these two cards out on my desk for the next couple of days to just sort of check in with myself and make sure that I'm bringing in these behaviors rather than these ones, that I'm planning and considering the future as well as the present rather than just taking on any and every opportunity and like not being willing to compromise. I think there's a lot of compromise and consideration in the 7 that I need right now. And so again with the 8s, I think it's about the projects and my ideas of not just letting them fly everywhere, not just letting all of the ideas fly off and trying to grab onto as many as I can, but really I think in this card in particular, I love this depiction, how this character has really picked off one of these clocks off the wall. And I love that it is clocks because time is our most valuable resource. And now I sort of have a bit of a plan forward of what I want to bring more into my life in terms of my decisions and my plans and all of that. Hello friends, I am back to do a very simple thing that I'm sure you're all going to get sick of in these videos, and that is Gratitarot. I've done a good riffle shuffle, several riffle shuffles and plenty of shuffles since we separated the deck for the last exercise. And in case you haven't gotten the memo, Gratitarot was originally created by Carrie Mallon. It's a very small exercise. I think she originally started it as an Instagram challenge, and I loved it, and it's become a mainstay in my tarot practice. Basically, the idea is that you just randomly draw, or you could consciously do it, but I like to randomly draw just a single card and then use that to sort of explore maybe one thing that you can really be grateful for the day. What can I focus on being grateful for today? I got the Hierophant. It's interesting here that we have the sort of the same like hand gesture that we get in the Rider-Waite-Smith, and the Hierophant is holding the keys here. We don't have the supplicants in front of the Hierophant in this card. And I do think it's really interesting how there's like a veil covering the Hierophant's eyes. I very much sort of see the Hierophant as symbolic of structures. I think obviously being the Hierophant specifically, there are sort of connotations of spirituality or religion, I think more specifically here. And I think in particular, it's like the outward manifestations of religion or spirituality. It's the practice itself and how that's structured. I do think too that the Hierophant can very often represent things like institutions and hierarchies. Like this is a character who is holding the key. It's not us holding the key, it's this Hierophant. And I think along with that, there's sort of different roles and expectations that come along with interacting with the Hierophant. And a lot of that has to do with tradition and history. To me, this card has a lot to do with doing things as they're supposed to be done. Doing things by the book. And there's two things that are coming up for me with this card. One, I don't think I can talk about a huge amount, so I will be a bit vague. The other one I'm happy to share. So the vague one has to do with a role that I play in my life that has been bringing me quite a lot of stress and dissatisfaction. And the institution that it's a part of, I think the Hierophant does represent quite well. And so I suppose with this coming up for me, it's reminding me of all the ways in which I can be grateful for the experience and opportunity that I've had with this institution, even if it's not feeling very fulfilling, satisfying now at this point in time. The other thing that I'm thinking about though is, and this is a bit of a stretch, but it did pop into my head, is these videos. Tarot is obviously associated with spirituality, alt spirituality, new age practices, at least these days. It's not exclusively those things, but I think in terms of how I interact with tarot, that's certainly a factor, or the framework, I guess. But then also just these videos, specifically these Keep or Cull tarot and practice videos, are very structured. They've sort of got quite a specific, systematic process to them. I think with the Hierophant and some of the expectations I was talking about earlier, one of those I think would be dedication and commitment. And I think for me, these videos kind of providing this structure around my tarot practice has really helped me re-engage with that practice. But it is requiring a lot of commitment and dedication from me to not only make these videos, but to show up for myself with the cards, to sort of commit to trying out different spreads, to commit to my decks and working with them. There's a lot of dedication inherent in this journey. And I think this sort of more, not regimented, that's not the right word, but structured approach to using my cards and sort of having this framework to put around my practice at the moment has been really beneficial. This series and my commitment to it has sort of unlocked this access to guidance and support that I'd sort of, put on my shelf for the last year. As always, Gratitarot leaves me feeling just a little happier, a little more content. I just really like this practice. And if you haven't given it a go yet, I highly encourage you to. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my deck today. I knew I wasn't in the mood for a reading, but then I was listening to the Speaking of Which podcast by Sammy and Skylar, and in that they did an exercise from Andy Matzner's book, the Tarot Activity Book. This is a book I read recently and I really liked it. I flagged a number of activities that I was looking forward to trying in the near future. And one of those activities that I did flag was the one that Sammy and Skylar did today. And that is the Strength/Weakness activity on page 78. And the objective of this activity is to help us understand that our greatest strengths can also cause distress if we're not careful. Think about the personal quality or characteristic that you're most proud of, or the one that people consistently have complimented you on. But there is always a shadow side to a person's strength. For example, a creative person might find it easier to focus on his art and not bother learning about the business side of things. Your challenge is twofold. First, to make sure that you acknowledge and honour your greatest strength. Second, to recognize that if you are not careful, it can become a liability. So the process for this exercise is to go through your tarot deck and to search for a card that you feel represents your greatest strength. Then, using that card as inspiration, we have 5 journal prompts to answer. So I had a few different strengths in mind that I just wanted to see, I don't know, which card jumped out to me. Now, some of you might remember that I've done exercises about my personal strengths and using tarot to sort of tap into those strengths before. One very obvious example is a video I did for my therapeutic tarot series, which I will leave a link to below. That was an exercise that I did partly with my therapist, my psychologist. And in that, we identified my strengths and I associated them with tarot cards. So I know what my number one strength is. So I feel quite connected to my greatest strength, and I feel quite connected to the particular tarot card that I feel represents that strength. But I did go through the deck anyway, just because I wanted to see with the Star Spinner in particular, if there were any other cards that jumped out to me for that, or maybe other strengths that I have that I wanted to journal about. So my number one strength is my appreciation of beauty and excellence. This comes from a quiz or test that I did with my psychologist a few years ago. And it was something that I never really recognized as a strength before, but has since become one of my favorite things about myself. I've done a lot of work with this strength. And it was the 9 of Pentacles that I've always associated with this strength. So I pulled out that card along with a few other cards that I think represent a few of my other strengths. And I think you could certainly do this exercise with more than one strength. Like, you don't just have to do it with your greatest strength. You could certainly do it with a variety of things that you think are your strong suits. So I may return to this in future and explore these other cards that I picked out. But for now, I decided just to go with the 9 of Pentacles and my appreciation of beauty. So our first journal prompt is, what is your greatest strength and how do you know? So as I said, my greatest strength is my appreciation of beauty and excellence. And I know this because of a test I took. And I have sort of further confirmed and connected with this strength through a lot of self-love and other therapeutic practices that I've done both by myself, with tarot, and with my psychologist. Our second journal prompt is, how has your greatest strength positively impacted your life? For me, this strength has brought me so much joy and pleasure. It has also brought me closer to people as I'm able to communicate and share my passions and enthusiasms with others who share similar interests. It helps me to connect with the earth and to foster hope when the world seems too big and too scary. Number 3, is there some aspect of your greatest strength that could be detrimental to your well-being? If so, how? I think it can lead me to get carried away or get caught up sometimes. My focus can shift from appreciating beauty to wanting beautiful things, which is fine, of course, sometimes and in moderation. Our fourth journal prompt is, can you remember a specific experience where this positive aspect of yourself actually ended up backfiring? Now, I certainly can think of a few times. I don't really want to talk about the specifics here, but I think usually when I lose control of this sort of like the balance that I think is necessary here, it can often be a sign that I'm unwell, like my mental health isn't in the best place. I think in those circumstances, that sensual joy and appreciation can be used as a distraction. And sometimes distraction can be helpful as like a harm minimization or reduction. But other times, I think I use it as avoidance. I think too that sometimes I'm almost like so swept up in awe and beauty that I fail to see maybe like something that could be harmful or negative in a situation. And I think that can and has resulted in me sometimes being a bit naive or even gullible. And our final journal prompt is, what are some things that could prevent your strength from becoming a liability? And I think for me, the main thing here is how important mindfulness is. I need to make sure mindfulness is always a central part of my appreciation. And if it's not, I think that's a really strong sign that I'm not appreciating. Instead, I'm avoiding or maybe indulging. And those are two very different things. And I love this card in particular in the Star Spinner because on the shoulder of the character here we have an owl, and obviously a lot of people associate owls with wisdom. And if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I'm a big fan of the therapy system DBT. In DBT, we talk a lot about something called wise mind. And that sort of describes this state of being that DBT sort of tries to teach us to embody more, where our logical thinking mind can sort of merge almost with our emotional side, but we also bring in like a sense of intuition as well as mindfulness. And so, I don't know, I really loved the owl being here in this card in particular, because to me that just really symbolized wise mind and just how important that is for me, and how when I'm in a state of a wise mind, when I'm embodying that sort of idea, I think my strength of appreciation of beauty and excellence is a wondrous thing that brings me so much joy. It's when I lose sight of that wise mind, when I step out of that space of mindfulness and intuitive connection, that's when it becomes less about awe and appreciation, and it can become more about things like avoidance or indulgence. I really enjoyed this exercise, and I'm definitely going to return to it to explore a few of my other strengths that were represented by those other cards that I pulled out. And thank you to Sammy and Skylar for inspiring me to do this today. I'll leave a link below where you can find out more about the wonderful Speaking of Which podcast. Okay, it is that time of the video where we have a bit of a chat about my thoughts and experience and reflections on my time with the Star Spinner Tarot, and we asked the question, is it going to stay in my collection or not? Firstly, I love this color palette. I mean, of course I do. Look at it. And it just feels so fun and perfect for like this spring summer period that we're going into here in Australia. And I just can't get enough of it. I love it. I love the artwork, how like delicate and intricate it feels, and yet the colors make it feel so bold and vibrant. Like it's this beautiful sort of composition that I find just really evocative and beautiful. I also really appreciate how the suits in the minors are almost color coded. Like it's very clear if you have a spread with like a large number of wands, for example, coming up, you can tell that straight away. And I know not everybody cares about this, but for a mass market deck especially, the production value on this deck feels so high quality. I love this cardstock. It's so easy to shuffle. It looks beautiful. It feels durable. Like I haven't had any issues with like anything really. Like it still looks in really great condition despite how much I've used it. The little box is great. The little book is great. Just in terms of the quality and what I received, I'm really happy with my purchase. Now I know I mentioned that this deck does have a lot of like folktale mythology stories interwoven through the art, and that I just sort of wasn't sure, you know, how much I would be exploring that in this video. Clearly I haven't done much in that way at all, and I just really enjoyed allowing myself to have a fairly like intuitive immediate response with the artwork, because it was just speaking to me so much that I was enjoying allowing that to flow. Having said that, I do remember watching an incredible video when I first got this deck by Casper over at The Boy Diviner. And it's been a little while since I watched that video, but from memory, Casper went through like all the different sort of folktale stories, mythology, and different characters, and just provided a lot of context to a number of these cards and helped explain like maybe the decisions that the artist had taken and like why different characters and stories were included in the cards. Just gave a lot of context and explanation. So that's definitely a video I will be returning to as I continue to explore the Star Spinner Tarot, and I will leave it in the description box below because I highly recommend it. So I suppose that answers the question. I do intend on keeping this deck. I really enjoyed my time with it. I think it's beautiful, and it just has this way of, I don't know, it feels quite light and breezy, maybe because of all those bright colors. And yet some of the imagery is really on point and quite poignant, I suppose. I found it really moving. I love that this deck is clearly inspired by the Rider-Waite-Smith, like the meanings very much align. And some of the cards even, especially in the aces, you can tell that there's like an homage being paid to the Rider-Waite-Smith and to Pixie's art. But it never feels like a ripoff. It does not feel like a clone. So many of these cards feel really unique and fresh. It doesn't ever feel derivative to me. It always just feels like the artist really took the time to consider how they wanted to like portray each and every card. And I feel like it's got a really strong voice for that reason. Of course, I love the addition of the extra lovers cards that we can choose from. I think that's just a really lovely touch. It definitely has like a fairy tale sort of feeling to it, and that's something I really, really like. I know not everybody does, but it's something I'm really drawn to. Almost feels like a really colorful, vibrant storybook in 78 cards, and I love it. So I will be keeping this deck, and I am looking forward to spending more time with it in the future. Now, one thing I did want to discuss is that I want to change the name of this series. Keep or Cull, I mean, I like the idea of it, and ultimately I do still want to work with the decks that I have, and wherever necessary or appropriate, like I'm more than happy to move decks on. However, I do sort of feel like the Keep or Cull title doesn't really describe what this video series is. Like, it doesn't describe what you're going to be getting when you click on that, because the vast majority of this video is about working with my deck, working with my cards and sort of exploring different messages and meanings and different exercises through the video with you. And yes, at the very end of a 36-minute video, we do talk a little bit about whether I'm going to keep the deck or not. But I don't think it's a great descriptor for what you're actually going to experience through the video overall, if that makes sense. And additionally, I don't want to put too much pressure on myself to get rid of decks for the sake of it. I'm aware that I've only gotten rid of one deck, and this is our 4th Keep or Cull, and I don't ever want to feel like I sort of have to meet a particular quota. You know what I mean? I also want the series to be somewhat flexible and for me to be able to use decks that are maybe a bit newer to my collection, and so I might not want to be making those decisions immediately, but I do want the opportunity to work with them and explore them in this video format. So there was a few working titles that I had in mind. One was Tarot IRL, another was just Working With, but I think that one's already taken. So what I've landed on is Tarot in Practice. I think that better sums up what we're doing, and it also allows me a little bit of flexibility in terms of this video series going forward. You can still expect pretty much the same sort of format and process though, the next time you click on one of these. Thank you to everybody who's been so supportive of this video series so far. It's honestly been a pleasure, a joy exploring this, like, I don't know, like doing tarot on YouTube in a little bit of a different way to what I've done before. I'm having so much fun, both with my cards and with you. And yeah, your feedback so far has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Of course, I have to say a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, and an extra special big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Laurie. Thank you so much. If you like what I do here online and you'd like to support me and my content, you can check out the link below to my Patreon. If that's not your thing, that's cool too. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below what you enjoyed about this video or any thoughts you have to share with me. I always love hearing from you. And until next time, so much love. Bye.